Hi there, this is Father John again with our second video on the Book of Common Prayer. And we're actually going to start in the back. So if you have your Book of Common Prayer available to you, we're going to be on page 687 because to use the Book of Common Prayer, you really need to understand the calendar and the lectionaries. And that's what this section is. And so the first section just talks about the calendar of the Christian year. And what's important to know is that our calendar year starts with Advent. So Advent is of 2020 is starting a new calendar year for us, which means that our year runs from the end of 2020 into most of 2021. That's one calendar year of the church. That's going to make a difference when it comes to how we look at the readings. But this section, it talks about Sundays. It talks about the principal feasts of the church: Easter, Ascension Day, Day of Pentecost, Trinity Sunday, Christmas Day, Epiphany, and All Saints Day. Those are the primary celebrations of the church, if you will, and those take precedence over anything. So the readings for Christmas Day take precedence over anything else that might be going on. There are also holy days, what they call red letter days, and those are listed on page 688. Those are feasts of the church. They're celebrations. They can be things such as the presentation of Christ in the temple, the visitation, the nativity of John the Baptist, and so on. Those are times when we are celebrating or remembering certain occurrences in the Bible, certain events. And those are things that can fall at any time during the church calendar. They might fall on a Sunday. If that's the case, you can use the readings that are associated with this, or you can also just use the readings for that particular Sunday. If they fall during the week, again, you can use those readings. Then there are kind of the opposite. We have days of feasting and celebration. We also have days of discipline, denial, and special prayer. And those are listed on page 689. Ash Wednesday being a primary one, Good Friday being another one. Those are often times of fasting. And then obviously all of Lent is also a part of these days of discipline. It talks about Ember Days. Those are days that are set aside for prayers for people called to holy orders. Rogation Days, a lot of just different days. And then finally on page 690, it talks about commemorations. And those are also what we call black letter days. They're optional commemorations. And there are two that are listed in the Book of Common Prayer. There's Anglican and Ecumenical. And those are basically remembering the saints of old, if you will. They can be celebrated. I often like to just look up a little bit about the person and find out, okay, on day January 2nd, we commemorate Samuel Azariah, the bishop in South India, who was an evangelist in 1945. And so I'll Google that and find out a little bit more about who he was and what he did. Starting on page 691, we start seeing a calendar. And this calendar lists the holy days, the red letter days in the first column, and then the optional commemorations in the other columns. And so you can see for each month what it is that we might be celebrating. And again, those are things that just may help to increase the depth of your worship and your readings as you learn about different people and saints and martyrs of the church. On page 713, there's a table for finding the date of Easter. Back in the old days with the Book of Common Prayer, you actually had to do math. It was weird. And you'd have to take the year and do all kinds of things for it. What they've done is they've just basically for each year, they've said what date Easter falls on. It's wonderful. And of course, you can always Google it as well and just say, in 2103, where is Easter going to fall? Well, it's going to fall on March 25th. There's also a table for finding movable dates on 714. Once we calculate where Easter is, then that means that other dates like Ash Wednesday and Pentecost and things like that, and even when Advent starts, those are dependent on Easter. And so once we know where Easter is, then we can figure out where these other dates are as well. So moving on through this section, the next section is the lectionary for Sundays and holy days. So every Sunday when you're in church, there's a certain number of readings, right? There's an Old Testament, there's an epistle, there's a psalm, there's the gospel reading. Where do we get those from? Well, this is where we get them from. And so in this case, there's 3 different years or 3 different sets of readings. There's year A, year B, and year C. Year A typically uses the Gospel of Matthew. Year B typically uses Mark. Year C typically uses Luke. John gets thrown in other seasons, Lent and some of those. So the key then is knowing which year are we in. Again, there was kind of some math involved with that. And it basically goes like this. Any year that is divisible by 3 is year A. Now you have to remember that we're starting in Advent and going around the calendar, right? So 2019 is indeed divisible by 3. And so that was year A, but that meant that starting in around, I don't know, November, December time of 2019 was year A. That went all the way through 2020 until now, the first Sunday of Advent, when we are now in year B. And so as we go through the readings, we know that that we need to be looking at the column, 3 columns, year B. And it says, you know, the first Sunday in Advent, these are what the readings are, and so on. So that's for Sunday worship. That's for the Eucharist. And that list goes on for quite a ways. It goes all the way to page 729, when you would again start a new year and start over. After that are the readings for holy days. So you remember that for some of those days, we might substitute different readings. And that's what that is there. There's some readings on page 732 for national days or for some of the other things. The next section is page 734, and this is the important section. So this is the daily office lectionary. Again, the daily office used to be in 2 cycles. You had to know if it was an odd year or an even year. What we've done, or what ACNA has done, is simplified that a lot. So there is basically 1 table for the Psalms, and that is on page, if I can find it, 735. And basically, you're going to go through the Psalms on a 30-day cycle. So starting on day 1 with Psalm 1 and ending on day 30 with Psalm 150. And those are split up between morning prayer and evening prayer. You can do that as a 2-year plan instead of a 2-month plan instead of a 1-month plan. And we'll talk about that. The next thing talks about how the lessons kind of came about for the daily office. And here's the thing, the Old Testament, you know, a lot of people say that, well, the Anglican Church isn't very scripturally based. We read a lot of scripture, particularly when you do the daily office. And so if you do the daily office, morning prayer and evening prayer, you're going to go through the Old Testament in a year. Now, there are a few chapters or books that are kind of left out, or a few verses, and you can see that on page 736. They talk about that. The Gospels and the Acts are going to be read twice a year, as are the epistles. And so we get, I mean, think about that. That means that you're reading through most of the Bible in a year, and the New Testament twice in a year. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of scripture. So don't let anybody ever tell you that Anglicans don't read the Bible. Starting on page 738, it lists the morning prayer and the evening prayer and the lesson. So again, on page 738, on January 1st, the first lesson is Genesis 1. The second lesson is John 1, 1 through 28. If you want to do a 60-day Psalter instead of the 30-day, then it lists there what Psalms you'd read. Then evening prayer, the same thing. You read Galatians 1, and then Luke chapter 2, 8 through 21. And so the next set of pages is based on that. If you do want to extend that to a year 1, year 2 type of thing, then basically you're just splitting morning prayer and evening prayer. That goes all the way to page 263, and that's the end of that section. With that in mind, we'll now be able to talk in the next video about the daily office. God bless.